Welcome to this launch of a very important initiative, Civics at Work. I'm Suzanne Spaulding. I'm the director of the Defending Democratic Institutions project here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And this project, since 2017, has been looking at the ways in which disinformation and information operations, particularly from Russia, but other countries and increasingly domestic voices, weaken our democracy. We looked over the content of that information war, and very clearly emerged efforts to exacerbate divisions within our country, to build a sense of identity around shared grievance rather than a shared sense of values or aspirations for our nation. Efforts to portray our system as not just flawed and needing reform, which it is, but as irrevocably broken, and that the individual is powerless to bring about any change. With support from the Hewlett Foundation and from Democracy Fund, we wrote a couple of reports with recommendations for how to counter this disinformation and its impact on our democracy. The most important recommendation we ultimately concluded was that we need to build public resilience against that pernicious messaging. And the best way to do that, we believe, is by reinvigorating civics education in this country. We need to remind Americans that democracy is under attack, that it is worth defending, not because it is perfect, but because it has the capacity to change. But only if we as Americans are educated, informed, engaged agents to bring about that change, to hold our institutions accountable, and to move us toward that more perfect union. We need to rediscover our shared values. We need to relearn the fundamentals of our democratic republic. And we need to reform a sense of identity and community all across the country. So with support from Craig Newmark Philanthropies, we launched a program called Civics as a National Security Imperative. We're a national security think tank. We're engaged in this because we do believe it is absolutely essential to our national security. We've been working over the years with civics groups and a wide array of folks who share our concerns as we've been advocating for reinvigorating civics education. But because it's a national security imperative and because civics has atrophied for decades in this country, it has been under-resourced and under-emphasized. We have a whole generation of adults that is not adequately up to speed on those fundamentals of our democracy and their role in it. Hence today's initiative, Civics at Work, where business leaders will sign up, take the pledge, and commit to doing three key things: to be advocates for civics, for reinvigorating civics education in this country; two, to have civics conversations with their own workforces to help empower their workforce to be more effective and constructive members of the workplace, of their community, and of our nation; and three, to support civics activities that are underway in their communities all across this country. CSIS will provide help and resources to businesses that sign up to take this pledge and commit to undertaking these activities. We're working with wonderful civics organizations. iCivics, the organization founded by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, is a great resource for folks who want to be more effective in their advocacy on behalf of civics. The Annenberg Public Policy Center's Civic Renewal Network, organization headed by Kathleen Hall Jamieson, is committed to helping their members take resources that they've developed over many years for K through 12 and adapt those to make them more appropriate for adult audiences in the workplace. So lots of activity underway. We have a great program today. We hope that you will be inspired to learn more about it. You can do that at a link for our project at csis.org. You can also email us at civics@csis.org. So let's get started. We've got initial prepared remarks, pre-recorded remarks by our signatory, our initial inaugural signatory, Brad Smith, the president and vice chairman of Microsoft, who will tell us why he thinks this is so important, and then a brief statement from Deborah Enix-Ross, who is the president-elect of the American Bar Association. The ABA has been a wonderful collaborator since the inception of this program, particularly through its Standing Committee on Law and National Security and its Public Education Division. So with that, let's get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Smith. I'm the president and vice chair at Microsoft, and I just want to take a couple of moments to share with you what we're doing at Microsoft when it comes to the Civics at Work pledge. I am really excited that Microsoft is an inaugural signatory to this pledge. I'm thrilled that we're joining Suzanne Spaulding and others that I know you're hearing from today. And I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Microsoft, but I think more importantly, I want to share with you, at least from one company's perspective, why I believe this pledge is so important. The pledge comes at a time when we at Microsoft have been focused on what it means to address civics in the workplace for our workforce. And so we've been able to move, I think, pretty quickly to put the pledge into action with concrete steps that we're taking. And I'm excited about that. We've created a civic engagement hub for our employees. We're using this hub to provide our employees with easier access so that they can see in very concrete ways where and how they can get involved in the community, connecting them with their passions and interests and making them more active citizens. This builds on broader work that we're doing as a company to enhance our own corporate responsibility and our own corporate civic work. We recognize that in the world today, civics at work is not only for the individuals that we work with, but it's for the company as well. And there's obviously a vibrant discussion and debate in the United States about the role that companies do play, the role that companies should play. And while I think we need to be thoughtful, we need to be circumspect, maybe even on certain days we need to be cautious, we also need to be committed and we need to be active. Because we do see the problems and issues across the country, and especially when it comes to something like digital technology, I think we have a role to play in ensuring that technology serves the country well. And we strive to do that. More broadly, I look forward every day to building on the needs of civic involvement with our workforce, with our employees, to encourage them not just to be involved, but to invest their own time and energy in learning more about our government, about our political process, and engaging in a way that enhances civility. Because I think we live at a time where sometimes perhaps we spend more time talking than listening, and we could always benefit, I believe, as a nation, from a little added injection of a little more civility into whatever the hot topic of the day should be. So we're taking these various steps, but then let me talk about why I believe this pledge matters so much. It's really for multiple reasons. First, let's face it, we are a country that since 1776 has been one of the world's greatest democracies, a democratic republic that depends every day for our freedoms on the involvement of our people. But we need an educated population. That was the founding recognition when our founders themselves signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And over the centuries, thankfully, we've consistently expanded the people in this country who vote, who decide our future, and who need to understand the importance of civics. But now connect that with the workplace. We also live at a time when employees look to their employers for more than they did in the past. There are days when I think it's somewhat unfortunate that some of our other civic institutions have not flourished to the degree that they once did. I sometimes look around and I see so many talented people who work here who don't necessarily have the kinds of connections in the local community. They don't have the community groups. They don't have the church involvement that prior generations did. And they look to us as an employer to help fill in some of that gap. I think the most important gap, frankly, that we can help fill is in this space of civics, education, and responsibility and involvement. And I think what's true at Microsoft is true among so many companies and across the business community. In short, we need to step forward. And in closing, I'll then say this. We need to step forward because one of the things that we see at Microsoft is, frankly, our democracy is under attack. It's under attack in part because of the growth in foreign nation-state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. Disinformation campaigns that seek to sow discord, that seek to divide us from each other, that seek to undermine the trust of the American public in the institutions that govern us and the institutions that are important across our society. The best antidote to that kind of effort is more civic engagement. It is to involve the American public more than in the recent decades in revitalizing and committing to the success of what makes this country great. That starts with civics. And these days, it needs to include civics at work. So thank you for the opportunity you've given us to join so many others who are championing this cause.
Hello, I'm Deborah Enix-Ross, President-elect of the American Bar Association. And I want to thank the Center for Strategic and International Studies for inviting me to say a few words at this Civics at Work launch event. The United States is at a critical moment in its history. We face a country divided over many issues: voting rights, policing, public health, climate change, and more. These divisions have roiled our politics. We have experienced decreasing faith in institutions and a growing distrust of one another. We have seen attacks on the justice system, the norms of our democracy, and the rule of law. These challenges are aggravated by incivility in public discourse and a general lack of understanding of civics. You know, it's been said that the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. So in this time of division, the legal profession, especially in our roles as resolvers of disputes, we must lead the way in promoting civics, civility, and collaboration, the cornerstones of our democracy, in order to restore confidence in our democratic institutions, in the judicial system, and to protect the rule of law. The ABA has resources and the ability to meet these challenges. And in this coming year, we will develop conversation guides for state and local bar associations and civic, professional, and government organizations to use in developing programs to model civil discourse on hot button issues. We will feature civics and civility programming at key ABA events throughout the year. And we will collaborate with other legal organizations on programming and activities, including Law Day, the day held annually on May 1 to celebrate the rule of law. I greatly appreciate the Center's dedication to these issues, and I'm confident that together we can make a difference. Our nation, our democracy, and our republic depend on us. Thank you.
So with those inspiring introductory remarks, we now have a terrific panel to carry forward the conversation. We've got Tom Fanning, who is the CEO of Southern Company. We have Teresa Hutson, who is the Vice President for Technology and Corporate Responsibility at Microsoft. And we have Mike Carney, who is the Vice President for Emerging Issues at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So thank you to the three of you for being here to discuss this. Tom, I'm going to start with you. You and I go back to my days at the Department of Homeland Security, where I was the Undersecretary, when you were the chair of the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. I have known you to be a tremendous public servant, a true patriot, and served with you as well on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And now I know that you're continuing to serve on Jen Easterly, the head of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's Cybersecurity Advisory Committee, which you co-chair. So your commitment to doing what you can to improve our nation and move us toward that more perfect union is unquestioned. And when I thought about where could we start with the Civics at Work? What CEOs might be interested in doing this? I, of course, immediately thought about you. And not surprisingly, you did not hesitate for a second when I put the question to you. Immediately, you responded, of course, that you wanted to do this. So it was clear to me, your commitment to this, but I'd like to give you a chance to talk about why you thought this was important. Why, with everything you have on your plate, you run this, one of the country's largest energy companies, and with lots going on. We've got these cyber threats coming in. You are as aware of them as anyone else. Lots going on. Why did you take this on? Why you add this to your plate?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. Delighted to be here. Always fun being with you. You're such a champion, and great to be associated with this. Look, Southern Company has this part of its DNA, and this goes back 100 years. I feel like I've been participating in this program my whole career. Southern Company, one of our former CEOs said that we must be a citizen wherever we serve. Said that around 1917, for heaven's sakes. And the point of that is to make sure that the communities are better off because we're there. When I think about this idea of a business model, it's, for us anyway, we're about the size of the nation of Australia from an energy production standpoint, but it's making, moving, and selling energy. But that's not the point. When you think about roles that we play, whether it's reimagining national security as we have, or whether it's my role as the Fed, I chaired the Atlanta Fed for 3 years, chaired the big Fed. The four corners of what we do doesn't really define the impact that we can make. And when we think about improving the communities because we're there, when we think about what it means to be a citizen wherever we serve, it really goes beyond kind of the what's of our kind of day-to-day responsibility. And it goes to this broader obligation to make America better. And we've structured ourselves that way. You think about the idea of the Southeast and how it has grown over the last 100 years and where it's going to go in the future. We want to make sure we have foundations in place, over $500 million. We commit people actually working. It's not enough to give people a check. It is involvement in supporting government, in supporting our schools, in supporting our churches, in supporting the various institutions that we have. And as these folks point out, I guess I have never seen America in a position where we have been so divided by thought. And I think the element of civics really goes to this idea of understanding first the issue, engaging in an active, honest way to understand the issues, and then as an obligation to really work constructively. As we see so many people on the left and the right, and they're shouting at each other and they're not listening. I think businesses like ours can play an important role in the middle to try to set the course to bring people together, to stop the shouting and have people have honest discussions about issues that matter to make this country better. We can't find ourselves in a position for very long where our citizens start to distrust the institutions of government and the people that run them. It is our obligation as business leaders to not only work with our employees, but to work with the communities we're privileged to serve to help solve these problems and to create a forum for understanding.
Yeah, outstanding. So as you think about, now you know, this is brand new and you've kind of just signed on to this, so you may not have had an opportunity yet to think this through in detail, but how do you think about having these civics conversations with your workforce?
It's part of our obligation as an employee. We say that it is your responsibility, whatever your job is, whether it's a kind of a big leadership role or whether you're the lowest level individual contributor. We expect that you will be engaged in the community, whether that's mentoring students or whether we've actually hired former school principals to go out and help set the curriculum in the schools in the state of Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and all the other, Illinois and Virginia, all the different places we're at. So we make it a responsibility to be engaged beyond your regular 8 to 5 kind of job. And so, you know, it's just part of our mission. It's what we do, and we expect everybody to abide by that.
Yeah, that's a message you convey to your workforce
all the time,
on a regular basis.
all
yeah.
the time.
Teresa, I know that Brad Smith, similarly, you know, right away, as soon as we asked, the response was, yeah, what can we do to help? And it was really not just the signature, but the support from Microsoft that has allowed us to move this forward and actually launch this. So thank you for that. But I know that this is part of a broader effort that's underway at Microsoft, that this particular Civics at Work piece is part of a broader effort. So talk with us a little bit about that broader effort.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. And I just love what you said about community. When I think about the division, it's like we've forgotten how to find our communities, and just trying to figure out the ways to do that is so important. So yeah, this is a part of a broader initiative called the Democracy Forward Initiative that we launched last July. It's building on some work that had been already underway called Defending Democracy, but this is pulling together a pillar that is around securing open and secure elections. There is a component of it that's really looking at the information ecosystem and how to improve resilience in the information ecosystem. And then the third pillar is actually around corporate civic engagement, both what does Microsoft do and then how do we really enable it for our employees. And so this is such a perfect way of giving our employees what they want, which is a way to engage. You know, they really do engage deeply on many, many, many issues. And this is actually a really, really great way to sort of take some of that energy and let them sort of use what they want to bring their passion, their energy into serving in their communities and the issues they care most about. So it's amazing, and I love how well it fits in with the program.
Yeah, terrific. Well, our hope, of course, is that we can help provide resources and point folks in the direction of resources that are out there to help both ensure that civil discourse that Brad Smith and Deborah Enix-Ross talked about, the importance of making sure that we understand how to converse, how to disagree without being disagreeable, that we hope that rediscovering some of the shared values or at least aspirations for what government should be could help with a more cohesive workplace, and so we're hopeful that will be one of the things that comes from this. And then that those civic engagement activities are put in a context of how this democracy is set up, right? What are the mechanisms? What are those 3 branches of government? How do they relate to each other, and what are they supposed to do, right? How do we hold them accountable? And then how does that relate to, in our federalist system, state and local efforts? And how can the individual be effective at all those levels so that they're not simply and importantly given the day off to vote, but that there are conversations, of course, around why and what is that all about. And Michael, I know that you at the Chamber Foundation have been engaged in these kinds of activities, and the Chamber and the Foundation have for many years, and that this is been a priority for you certainly recently in the last year or more. And again, part of a Civics Trust effort that you have underway, and so do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and first, it's an honor to be here with two companies that are great corporate citizens. And we started looking at civics in a really robust way several years ago. And what we realized was that civics education and civic knowledge were critical components that would shape the future of our country. Americans are not as informed as they could be about how our system works. They don't have enough skills in some of the areas like we're talking about, civility. So we decided that we would go all in because we believe in business. We believe in business as a force for good. And we believe that business has a critical role to play in ensuring that every American, whether he or she is going to grow up to be a plumber or a president, has the knowledge, the skills, and the disposition to fulfill their responsibilities and exercise their rights in our democracy. Now, the Civic Trust, which you mentioned, we announced in January, and it has three components. One is civic literacy. I actually just got back from Albuquerque where we're testing something called the National Civics Bee. And this is a competition for middle school students. And if you want to feel enthusiastic about the future of this country, you listen to these kids talk about how they want to engage in the community, and they show their knowledge, and you realize that some of us in the audience didn't know the answers to the questions, which was also humbling. So civic literacy is a key component, and it's through things like the National Civics Bee that we hope to solve one of the bigger problems, which is we deprioritized civics several generations ago. We can't rely on the school system to fix that. So we have to find other ways to engage with those populations, and to do so in a respectful manner. So the second pillar is civics at work. And that's why we've been so happy to partner with Suzanne and to bring messages and information to the business community. And then the third pillar is to elevate civics as a national priority. We believe that it is not a good idea to have a system in which for every $54 that we spend on STEM education, we spend 5 cents on civics. That is not a sustainable path to a strong democracy. And it's something that we hope to see change.
Yeah, Tom Michael mentions the disparity in federal resources going to STEM, which we all agree is vital for our national security, $50 or $54 per student, and 5 cents per student on civics, that vast disparity, understanding that civics is equally vital to our national security. I mentioned that you and I were on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and I was so pleased to see the commission, agree that in its report to include a recommendation for reinvigorating civics education. And then one of the last products put out, maybe the last product put out by the commission before it went out of business as a government entity and stood back up as a private entity, Cybersecurity Solarium Commission 2.0, was a white paper on disinformation.
Yeah.
And the very first recommendation was?
Yeah, that we need to invest in civics education. And in fact, so we're working together now also at CISA. In this CISA advisory board we're on, there's a subcommittee on mis, dis, and malinformation. Look, it is a privilege and an obligation as a citizen to have, I would say, a broad bandwidth of engagement in which we will seek to understand an issue, and not just the issue you prefer to align with, but rather all the facets of that issue so that you can really have a deeper understanding and engagement. And so, in fact, if you do have a perspective and somebody else has a different perspective, we can first understand where they come from, seek first to understand, but then secondly, figure out a way to have this constructive engagement. And that's why I've been so passionate about business having a big role in helping solve this kind of crazy elements of left and right. We can create a constructive middle. Individuals can as well. We know from a national security standpoint, one of the weapons of cybersecurity is to have the bad guys, whether that's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, or any of the derivatives or any of the other players, create disharmony in the American culture as an intention to weaken democracy. And if they can do that, the bad guys can be more effective and more influential in advancing their own interests, which are likely adverse to the United States. The United States citizenry should understand that when we see those kinds of elements develop, something feels a little funny or it feels a little extreme. Ask the question. Do your own research. Take responsibility for understanding the issue in its entirety as we start to exercise our obligation as citizens to do something about it.
Yeah, and you talked about cybersecurity and its role in enabling information operations. I really see reinvigorating civics as absolutely essential to our making progress on cybersecurity. And Teresa, I know Microsoft is very involved in helping to secure our networks and in cybersecurity. When I was the undersecretary at DHS, I would go around the country and I would talk to groups of Americans about their important role in cybersecurity. And I would say, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. And I often got blank looks. Like, people just really couldn't relate to that. And it finally occurred to me that part of the consequence of our de-emphasizing civics education and civic skills in school is that we have not really inculcated a sense of civic responsibility.
Yeah.
That sense that you have an obligation to something larger than just yourself, right? And all of the folks that I work with in government, that's what drives them to government. But a lot of Americans just haven't, they were ill-served and they haven't really absorbed that. And so when you say you have an obligation, whether it is to secure your system, your network, your computer so that it can't be used to harm others, or you say you have an obligation to not pass on bad information, right? That sense of civic responsibility is missing. How does this is part of what I hear Brad Smith saying, right? And what he said when he and I chatted as part of our Civics as a National Security Imperative as well, where he talked about that he thought it was important for his employees and his colleagues in the tech community to understand their role in the world.
Yeah, it's the cybersecurity example is such a key one here because, as we know now, basically the most trusted institution remaining for people is their employer. And therefore, employers really have an opportunity to be a sort of a trusted voice. And we've definitely seen that in the cybersecurity space. We roll out lots and lots and lots of training to our employees about how to keep our networks secure, how to spot, any sort of bad activity. And so this is a really great sort of next step in that because we do have that audience who still, for the most part, trusts us as an employer. So we can, so I'm a reformed employment lawyer. So it's a little bit shocking to me sometimes that the trusted institution is the employer. But we have, I don't want to say we have a captive audience, but we have an audience who is willing to listen to us, and we have an audience who is eager to engage. And I think that the trick, and it builds on some things that people have said, is I feel like everybody's talking to each other like this. They're just looking at each other and yelling at each other. But what we need to do is flip them so they're all looking out together to say, what is our core and common shared interest? I think it is absolutely true that we have lost our sense of kind of connection to what is amazing about democracy because it's been missing from education. And so it's a sort of an enormous responsibility, I think, that employers have. But I think we have to step into it because no one else is stepping into the void at this point. So I'm hopeful that we'll get somewhere with our employee base on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love that image of getting people to look outward, right, and think about themselves as part of a community, as part of this nation, as part of the world, right? And what does that mean? What are the implications of that? When I first started working on this issue and talking about this issue, I talked a lot about rediscovering our shared values. I now talk about rediscovering our shared values or at least our shared aspirations.
Yeah.
Right? I think that one of the things we have to do to rediscover that civil discourse, to begin with understanding, is go back and back and back and back to find something on which we can agree. There's so much on which we disagree. Find something on which we can agree. And I can't help but think that if you had a room full of workers, of adults, in a lunchroom for an hour, that one of the things that you might talk about is, who thinks we should aspire to have a government that meets the needs of its people? That we should aspire to have a government that is fair, that treats everyone fairly. I mean, just sort of basic common things that we can agree on, and then we can work from there, right? Work up from there. Michael, one of the things we think a lot about is what are the most important things that you would convey? We're trying to be realistic as we think about these conversations in the workplace. Maybe it's an hour that you have with this listening audience
Yes.
At work. What's your sense of what are some of the most important things you would, if you had that 1 hour, what would you try to convey?
Well, I think, one of the things we learned from COVID is when we were thinking through ways to encourage people to get vaccinated, we learned that one of the most effective messengers was the employer. And then when we looked at what messages from employers resonated or changed behavior, it was leading by example. So if the employer got the shot and made it visible, employees were more comfortable making that positive decision themselves. So I think the first thing is for corporate leaders, like we're seeing here today, but it doesn't matter what size business it is. It could be a small business, a medium-sized business, or one of the largest in the world. Having that kind of clear, consistent message from the top and then from the middle is really, really important. You really do have to live your values. And that's kind of what we're hearing today, right? At the Southern Company, at Microsoft, it's not just saying, it's doing. And I think so that's really, really important. At the same time, I think we have to really, really create opportunities for people to be exposed to others who have opinions that are different. It could be a function of, their political views. It could be their personal experiences. But we should never be starting these conversations by looking down on someone because of their viewpoints. I think we need to begin from a place that people are coming to the conversation with the knowledge they have and from a good place, and then begin there. I mean, I think we spend way too much time talking about blue states and red states and purple states, and not enough time talking about the United States. Why does this country exist? Why are there millions of Ukrainian refugees who want to come here? And why are there so many Americans who are raising their hands and saying, I'll take you in? We think that civic skills are the 21st century job skills. And so creating, just expanding some of the opportunities where you're teaching people how to communicate effectively, how to disagree without being disagreeable, how to operate within a system. Some of the largest companies rival the government in terms of complexity, and understanding how you fit within that system and having a sense of agency. All of that can be adapted at the smallest level or at the largest level.
Yeah.
Even beyond being an employee or being a participant in a system, I think one of the most inspirational things an individual can do is learn that everything they say or do has a consequence to someone or something.
Yes.
And the power that we have as individuals in that regard is way bigger than we ever imagined. Mm-hmm. And so take a moment to understand that as a matter of diversity and the value of diversity, it isn't about necessarily, even though I think the determinants matter, race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and all that other stuff that makes us wonderful, complex individuals. What we're really gained by pursuing those kinds of skills is broader context, a greater thought leadership, a greater understanding, greater vision and courage to see around the corners of the future. See, what we got to do is get people to play offense here. Defense mindset, I get that. I don't want to be fired, But what I really want to do is make things better for the kids that come after me. If we can set that as a base goal, okay, what does that mean? And how do we now start to work together to make that a reality? All that stuff you say is so true.
Well, it just, when you were talking about shared aspirations, and you actually, as you were all talking, I was just thinking it's like really going back to kindergarten. Like, what did we have in common in being kind to each other, sharing, that kind of stuff that's really basic that, we have lost. And it is, how to talk to each other, how to listen to each other, how to value what someone else brings, because it will make you better. You can have, and I love the reminder that the things we do have consequences. Like I feel like that's really been lost. You can't scream at somebody on the internet and not believe that it hurts them. Like, there's just that sort of basic stuff that I wish we could get back to among each other.
And frankly, I think Americans are thirsting for this.
Yeah,
I was just going to say the same thing.
As a matter of patriotism, patriotism, we want this nation to be better. We love where we are and we want it to be better. What can we do as individuals? Well, civics is part of it. Understanding how all that works, understanding our influence on the communities we're privileged to serve and live in. How do we contribute? How do we set a forward vision? This is the kind of thing we're talking about right now. And I swear to you, for all the divisions we see, I think this common view of how do we get better, I think people are all in on that.
Yeah. So I think the surveys would prove you right, Tom. Frank Luntz, a Republican pollster, did a survey recently which presented folks with options for ways to improve, create a stronger sense of national identity, right? To rediscover the things that unite us rather than divide us. And a list of really good ideas of things to do. The number one choice of everyone was renewing civics education in this country, strengthening civics education in this country. And it was chosen by an identical number of Democrats and Republicans. 59% of Democrats, 59% of Republicans said teaching civics is the most important thing we can do.
Yeah.
The Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which is a bipartisan, really nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan, that's what I always say too.
Nonpartisan committee, but made up of Republicans and Democrats in Congress and others. Consensus around this idea that we need to reinvigorate civics education. The Public Service Commission, which started out looking for ideas about how do we increase interest in national service and serving in the military, did not think civics was on its agenda. But at the end of the day, their number one recommendation from this bipartisan panel was to reinvigorate civics education. So there is a lot of Congress has bipartisan legislation, a number of pieces of legislation that's introduced. There is bipartisan support, and yet there is also a concern that this issue can be politicized, gets pulled into the partisan politics, that it will be controversial. So how do we deal with that? Mike, you're smiling. How do we make sure that this stays out of that polarization and partisan fray, or exists in the context of it?
So I think you just answered it with the end of your question. There's almost nothing that we can keep out of the political context right now. So we need to accept that we are a hypersensitive people right now. And we need to give forbearance to those who might misinterpret a focus on civics, or who might have a different interpretation of it, and just keep moving forward, because it is so important. The United States is going to celebrate its 250th anniversary in just a few years. It is our objective to get every business in America engaged on these issues between now and then. Because 250 years seems like a lot to those of us in a young country, but in the annals of history, that is not a long time. And we cannot take our democracy for granted, because it's what enabled the prosperity that has been unprecedented in the history of humankind that America has achieved. So I think we need to accept that some things are going to become increasingly politicized, but the stakes of not being aggressive about defending the future of our democracy are far greater than any short-term cost around politicization.
The obligation to fully understand issues is really hard. I think a lot of people would like to live within their echo chambers. This is the way I believe, and this is what I'm going to listen to, and I'm not going to do anything else. One of the things we do inside Southern, just did it at an executive forum. 150 of our officers get together. We talk about issues, and you'll take a position. I say, okay, well, now take the other side of your issue. And make people have a constructive dialogue about what it means to see all the different sides around the issues. And we do that regularly. It's almost a Socratic method in which we engage our officer groups. But then we say, we want you to have shadow leadership. We want you to take these lessons and go back in the workplace and actually talk about what it means to value diversity, what it means to kind of understand that a whole section of our economy has been left behind by the recovery. And what do we do about that? Where is our economic equity in America? And what can we do to solve that? There's so many issues. Force people to take all the sides of an issue and advance it that way.
Yeah, that sounds like a best practice we should capture for our guide that we're putting together for companies about how to have these conversations. We want to focus on both the content, what's the most important concepts and skills to convey, and then what are the best practices for doing that in an adult sort of workplace environment. And I love that. I think that's great. Michael, one of the things you have emphasized with me over the course of the last several months as we've had these conversations is how important it is to remember that most Americans work for small or medium-sized businesses. They don't work for the big Microsofts or Southern companies of the world, and how the Chamber can help us to reach out to these small and medium-sized businesses and make sure they have the resources if they want to sign up to engage in these activities as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point, and I'm glad you brought it up. One of the things that we will be doing, I'm going to be very declarative here, is taking best practices and lessons and learnings from companies like yours and others, and making sure that they're shared in a way that they can be replicated, translated, or copied, or just adapted. We think of civics it's a huge issue, right? When you think of civics, you think of school. But although I saw recent data that suggested 30% of respondents, adults, had no memory or had not taken civics in school. So that's a lot of people. And the workplace can be an effective way to reach them. There are different things that different companies can do, but I want to really reinforce something that we heard earlier. It's not just about writing a check. The first thing that we did when we engaged in civics was we worked with Harvard Business Review to produce a white paper, the business case for civics. And our audience for that was companies, because we wanted companies to prioritize this issue. But it was also for civics organizations that are doing good work, but when we talked to them, they said, oh yeah, we'd love to get money from companies. We're like, no, that might help, but there might be other things that they can do to further your mission. And so we've been really quite hopeful that we can bring companies to the table as groups like CSIS are thinking about civics at work, or groups like, are thinking about games and programs. There's a lot that companies can bring. And again, we learned some things from COVID. We did a lot with Microsoft. It wasn't about writing checks. And we're still doing stuff where it's about leveraging the technology for good. So I think that small businesses, we're doing the National Civics Bee pilot in Brownsville, Texas, one of the poorest places in the country, one of the most enthusiastic when it comes to the Civics Bee. And small businesses, I think it's called Raising Cane's. It's a chicken restaurant. Yeah. They gave every kid who entered a voucher for a free meal. That's a small thing that a small business is doing down there that's making a big difference.
You know.
Well, I think it's exciting to think about, particularly in that third bucket under the pledge, which is to support civics activities in your communities. The large companies that sign on, finding ways to support these conversations happening in the small and medium-sized businesses in their communities. Yeah. The local chamber chapter has a free pizza and beer night, for that's an opportunity for small businesses to send their their employees to have conversations of the kind that we're talking about here, for example. So lots of room for creativity. I am again going to plug for businesses of any size, if you're inspired by this conversation, to email us at civics@csis.org or go to the Civics at Work webpage and look at the pledge. And that reminds me that I should tell all of those who are watching, all of you who are watching, to be sure to get your questions in for this terrific panel. You can do that through the events page. There's a button to push to enter your question that you would like to ask. So we're going to give you a little bit of time to do that. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask all of you to talk about an issue that is in the forefront of so many Americans today in our minds and our thinking and our thoughts and our prayers, and that is Ukraine and Russia's unprovoked invasion of that democratic country and the West's response to that invasion, which I think is a real teachable moment for Americans about what we mean by the rule of law and a rules-based order and the strengths of democracies. But I'd be very interested in your thoughts on what this has to tell us, all Americans, about the strength of democracy.
Look, we've pulled together as many employees as we could find that had significant relationships back to Ukraine. And the first thing we wanted to do there was to listen to their stories and what were they hearing from their relatives or whatever it was back in Ukraine. And the idea was how we can help. We know that democracy is a fragile animal that we have to actively work on. It's almost like a marriage, right? I mean, sometimes it's not easy, and yet you still have to reinvest every day. Today's going to be better than yesterday, and tomorrow's going to be better than today. And we know also that when we see that threatened, that we act in a way that creates such a, I won't say universal, but such, in many respects, a global solidarity in saving it. And that's where I think we've been so successful in rallying countries around the world to intervene and preserve what is under attack right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly has shown us that there are things we agree upon. I think it's also shown us that it is possible to be a really compelling speaker in President Zelensky to remind us about what we agree upon. And, you know, I think it also, as with many disasters, it can, and tragedies, it can bring out the very best in who we are. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, what we see from our employees is a rush to help. How can we give money? How can we work on things that will help the Ukrainian citizens, whether in Ukraine or as refugees? Mm-hmm. You know, where can we build technology? You know, to your point, you know, we've launched LinkedIn for refugees just to kind of help people specifically in that situation. And so, you know, as we were talking earlier, I was really thinking about how the question is, how do we tap into our better natures? And something like this can help us see what we have in common, and we can draw on our better nature. And to tie it to democracy, we can see that it matters, that it makes a difference if your country can defend itself, whether from cyber attacks, from disinformation, or from actual kinetic attacks. Like, this is a really core thing I think much of the world agrees on in a time when it's hard to find much we agree on about anything. So in a way, it's this awful thing that I think can show us what is good about us. And so, you know, I look for a sliver of hope in that.
I would endorse everything that was just said. What I would add to it is, I think what's happened in Ukraine has really simplified some of the kind of the math that we all do. There's right and there's wrong. And what's happened in Ukraine is clearly wrong. And it's also made things that can be very abstract, like the principles of democracy and Plato's cave and all of these things, very tangible. There are tangible things happening in Ukraine that are bad, but there are also tangible things happening that are good. So it was 6 months ago that President Zelensky had a very, very low approval rating. And now, not so low, because he was the leader that the country needed at that moment. Here in America, that abstraction is translating into actual things that people can do. That's why at the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation, we're really happy to be part of Welcome.us, which is helping ensure that there is support for Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes. That there are opportunities, and we see lots of employers providing jobs. We see individuals and employees providing housing, providing sponsorship through the administration's new Uniting for Ukraine program. So I think, all of the things about our democracy make me feel really positive about the future. If we can just get past the kind of annoying disagreements we're having about the relatively inconsequential stuff. Because when it comes down to life or death, we're in the right place.
Well, and I think, that sense of how powerful a country can be when the population does come together, when they mobilize as one around a common cause. It's pretty powerful, and it's a reminder of what we could do to address the challenges we face if we find those ways to come together instead of focusing on our divisions. I do think it makes concepts like the rule of law concrete. And I think we need to give those words, I think we need to talk about it that way. You're absolutely right. I think Americans just in their gut know that it's wrong for one country to just decide they're going to march in and take over another country. They may not think of that as the rules-based order, right? Like, they don't know what that, I mean, most Americans don't know what that means. Why should they, right? They may not connect that to their understanding of the rule of law. But I think we need to talk about it that way. That's what that is. That is a sense that might doesn't make right, right? And that's important. That what we're seeing here is the value of true allies coming together, right? Instead of just coerced, countries who have to be beholden to you because you have economic leverage over them, but that we have true allies who share this commitment to the rule of law, and that requires work. It doesn't just happen overnight. The value of transparency, that democracies thrive in a transparent environment such that we can reveal information, we can pre-bunk disinformation or false accusations that we anticipate will be coming to try to sway public opinion, right? That democracies have this advantage over authoritarian and totalitarian regimes that need dark corners to hide secrets from their own population. We should be turning on the light. I talk about the notion of training to fight in the light, right? If you train to fight in the dark, you could meet your adversary at night, turn off the light, and you'd have the advantage. We have been training for decades, for centuries really, to fight in the light, because that's what democracy demands. It demands a level of transparency. We need to continue to train to fight in the light so that we can meet our adversaries in this increasingly transparent world, turn on those lights, and have the advantage. And I think these are really important lessons that we can draw from this and take advantage of the public's focus on what's happening,
facing
right?
This way instead of this way.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Teresa, facing this way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important time and teachable moment, and you all have articulated that very well. So we've reached a point where we can look at some of the questions that we're getting from our audience. The first question is whether this initiative is just for businesses or business leaders. And I'll take the first whack at that. It's our initiative. I will say our focus today and at the moment is on businesses and business leaders, but we are very mindful that a good percentage of our population works for governments, state, local, federal. And this past Constitution Day, we made a point of reminding our friends in the federal departments and agencies that the Byrd Law that created the Constitution Day also imposed a requirement on federal departments and agencies that they take that day as an opportunity to talk about civics with their workforce and provide materials about the Constitution. Particularly we feel our national security workforces we need to make sure they have a solid grounding in the concepts that we've been talking about today. If the tech community has a responsibility to understand the role it plays in a democracy, our federal workforce certainly does, right, Tom? And that national security workforce. So they're certainly on our radar screen, members of the military. They draw from the same population that you're drawing from, that has been underserved by civics education. So we need to make sure that our law enforcement, our military, our national security community.
And importantly, it's not just tell people about kind of government, and it's give them, empower within the individual a way to act and to intervene in a constructive way. I think that is the most powerful thing we can do. What can you do to make this country better, to make your community better, to make your family better?
Yep. And not only, I think that's exactly right, Tom, and not only does that hold great promise for our ability as a nation governed by and for the people to move toward that more perfect union, but it is a good antidote to Putin's message that the individual is powerless, that the individual has no agency in this system, right?
Yeah.
Well, and building on, Brad talked about our civic engagement hub that we've launched for employees. This is really intended to tap into that and give individual people the chance to engage in their communities. And we've been talking with a lot of partners. University of Washington Center for an Informed Public is working on misinformation days and disinformation days focused on like high school students. And how do you think about, high school students teaching their parents how to consume information? So kind of really tapping into that collective, whether it's the military, whether it's government, whether it's business, or whether it's individual people. All of this has to be done ultimately by people. And so I think we need to have it inclusive of everyone if it will be effective.
Yeah.
I think local chambers of commerce so every town in America has a local chamber. And we've been talking to them about this. And every single one of them has raised their hand and said, I want to get involved. Because even if they didn't express a specific concern about the state of the civic health of their community, after they started talking it through, every single person recognizes the need for this at the community level. So I think Civics at Work is just one mechanism to reach people. And it's really, really important that, and I really want to reinforce this, that we do not overlook people who have been traditionally forgotten when it comes to civics education. We heard from the ABA, a lot of the civics programs are designed by lawyers for future lawyers. And that's great, but not everyone's going to grow up to be a lawyer. Or
stay a lawyer.
But everyone is going to grow up to be a citizen in a democracy. So we've been spending a lot of time talking to local chambers of commerce and finding ways to get them engaged. Not specifically to tell them exactly what to do, but more to inspire, plant 1,000 flowers and see what blooms. And then as things start emerging in one community, looking at it and saying, can we copy this somewhere else with someone else, with a different organization? So I think local chambers are a key pathway both to employers but to communities. Because to Teresa's point, business is one of the trusted institutions that we have left. So business has to lead on this.
Yeah. And I love your point, Michael, about lawyers providing civics and judges in courts all across the country, bring in students into their courtrooms and they do mock trials and a lot of that, and that it needs to be focused on helping everyone to be more informed and engaged citizens. I'm on the board of a wonderful organization called Girl Security, and they go into high schools and talk to high school girls about national security. And the idea is, in part, to build that pipeline so that we can have a more diverse workforce in national security to help improve our outcomes. But it is also just to help women, girls, who will become women in our society, to be comfortable being engaged and informed on national security and not intimidated by national security, right? So I do think that picking people up where they are, helping them to be more informed and engaged citizens, regardless of what their work is ultimately going to be, is important. Part of our focus also, and this was in our commission recommendations, aside from these adults at the workplace and government workers and at all levels, community college, right? So we need to the focus is on expanding past K through 12. And then we need to teach our teachers. Civics is a really scary subject to teach these days for the reasons we've talked about.
Oh, sure.
Right? You're likely to get letters from parents. And so how do we help empower these teachers who are being brave enough to have these important conversations in their classrooms? How do we teach them how to teach civics? Yeah.
That's a really important point. And what I would add to it that the business community can do is make sure that the superintendents and the boards of education in these communities are backstopping those teachers. I mean, it's not a representative sample, but a lot of the civics teachers that I've spoken to have expressed concern about discussing controversial or current events in class because they don't want to get the letters from the parents. They don't have confidence that the institution will support them. And that's a dangerous thing because I believe the evidence shows that talking about current events and engaging on current events is one of the most effective ways to not just acquire knowledge, but to acquire skills. So I think that making sure that the school administration is supportive of the teachers can be critical.
Well, I love what you said earlier about these are the skills of the future for the workforce. Yeah. I mean, it's so true that being able to listen, being able to engage in a conversation, that's so core. And I wonder if there's something in that, in just getting more principals and superintendents and boards to understand that this is actually preparing your workforce of the future. Yeah. Less about even political discourse, but this is going to help you get a job.
Yeah. We use the concepts of what's and hows, and the what's are kind of your skills, make, move, sell electricity or whatever it is. But the hows are as important and more powerful.
Right.
Our behaviors with each other, with the external communities that we do serve, really do project our personal power in positive ways if we do it right. And that's where I think we can start with a grounding in civics to really understand how we fit into that structure and how we can influence for the better of us all.
Yeah. So one of the questions from our audience is, and we're going to hear in a few minutes from Kathleen Hall Jamieson, the director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pittsburgh and leader of the Civic Renewal Network, that's going to be adapting resources. So one of the questions from the audience is, what kinds of resources, do you have any requests from them, any guidance for them as these civics organizations look at their K through 12 generally materials and look at ways in which they can adapt those or provide other kinds of resources for you as you try to fulfill your commitment under this pledge and your own independent objectives in empowering your workforce? What are the kinds of things that might be useful for you as you sort of reach for stuff to help guide these conversations?
Well, as I said before, we hire past principals of schools to intervene on the curriculum. And so to your points, I mean, we do think this is important stuff. And so there's a base level that we ought to all kind of grasp. And then I think every community is a little bit different. And so what we want to do is understand the needs of that community and how best to project our positive actions there. That takes local knowledge. That's why, in my view, this can't be a, tablets from the mountain exercise. This really does have to be a bottoms up with leadership enabling and supporting the good work that will happen in our communities.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's, I'd love examples of the good we do together. I do think Ukraine is a very good example, a moment in time to ground in what communities can do together. And I think we have a lot of examples of that. Make it about community, almost deliberately about community and not politics. I think civics sometimes gets into, we need people to understand what governments do, but if we can ground in community and the power of community we were talking earlier about COVID and the COVID responses. And one of the most powerful things for me in my entire life was to see the Seattle and Puget Sound community come together to respond to a crisis. And it didn't matter, people weren't asking you what your ideology was even. It was just, we need some more masks for people in schools, or we need help setting up a vaccine clinic. Not even like, are you pro or against vaccines? We just need some help. And so grounding it in that community, I think also speaks to some of that kind of bottoms up local piece of it.
And I think to be able to talk about outcomes, I love the simple New Jersey question I like is, so what?
Yeah.
So what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
Tell me what outcome you want, and let's work towards that in a constructive way.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't have much to add to what I just heard. The thing that resonates with me is community is so important. And there are some really wonderful examples out there of what companies have done, but you have to work hard to find them. So I think one thing that would be very helpful for CSIS to do is to just kind of, and you can work with us on it, is to just collect these examples. Allstate and Courageous Conversations, or Roy Spence, a advertising guru who created the front porch and carts it around and sets it up in a town, and they have conversations on the front porch.
Yeah.
His mom taught civics for 30 years, and he cares about this. So he's got this front porch thing that the whole home builders built, and they're dragging it around. It's little things like that you can replicate, that you can do. I'll give you one other example. I heard about a company in the Southwest where they have a lot of ballot measures. So what they started doing was they would have an all-employee meeting, and they would invite both sides of the ballot measure to come and just explain what that was. Because anyone who's read a ballot measure, I mean, maybe you're smarter than I am, but I can never figure out what it actually means. So these people come in and explain it. And that's really important in the local context, where this is a critical part of the political process. But leading by example is the key thing.
And I think it's important to try. You start somewhere, right? Motion breeds momentum. So let's get out there and start at the local level and get something going. Give it a shot, see how it goes, modify it if you need to. But let's start momentum building here.
Yeah. And it seems to me that if you start with engagement, some sort of civic engagement, it provides a good context to then sit folks down and say, okay, we all agree we want to do X. We want to find a way to get more teachers in our school, whatever. Who are the players in our government that might have a role in making this happen, right? Use that as a teachable moment to convey, to increase the number of people who understand that we have three independent and separate branches and what they are and what they do, and that we have then state and local governments and how they relate and where you plug in and who can do what. Because, I think it's really important for Americans to have that base knowledge in addition to that sense of community and engagement. And little things can make a difference. I'm on a campaign to get sports arenas all across the country to make sure that they put the question mark at the end of the national anthem. People don't focus on the fact that the national anthem that we sing starts with a question, never answers that question, ends with the same question. It starts by saying, can you see that flag? Can you see the Star-Spangled Banner? Because this was written as the sun's coming up the morning after the battle. Right? We saw the flag flying during the battle. When the bombs were bursting in air, we saw the flag was still there. But now the battle's been over and it's been quiet. We don't know. We don't know. And so at the end it says, does the flag still fly over the land of the free and the home of the brave? I think it's a challenge to us every day to make sure that we are part of answering that question with a yes, right? This is not a given. This is always uncertain. And it is incumbent on all of us to rise to that challenge. And so I just think it would be really nice to have that question mark at the end.
I think that's fabulous. I'm stealing it.
Love that.
You're welcome to do
That's
so,
great.
Chow.
He's going to new stadiums.
I'm going to order a bunch of question marks.
There you go. There you go. You can talk to your local stadium owner. Well, we are very fortunate to be joined at this point for some closing remarks by a very strong supporter and good friend, Kathleen Hall Jamieson, who is a renowned expert on disinformation herself, but really has been at the forefront and in the trenches to reinvigorate civics education, producing seminal papers every decade on why this is so important, and who is a full partner as we try to develop resources and go forward. And Kathleen, I'm so pleased that with your very busy schedule, you were able to join us, and I turn it over to you. Oh, we need sound.
Can you hear me now? This sounds like a telephone ad. It's been such a pleasure to hear this conversation. And Suzanne, I would also add something to your question mark at the end of the song that we all sing but don't think about. And the presupposition of that is that we are still the land of the free, the home of the brave. And I think there's not simply a question, can you see the flag, but how to ensure that we are the home of the free. And I've loved the discussion that focuses on the fact that Ukraine is teaching us how important things that we've taken for granted actually are inside our society. I hope teachers across the country are finding ways to teach our structures of government and our protections and our rights in relationship to Ukraine. Because I think it's a very difficult time for the nation's children to watch the terrible things that are happening to children in another country. I'm here just delighted to be partnering with you on this effort and to say that we helped play a role in bringing out a document a number of years ago called Guardian of Democracy, Civic Mission of Schools. And we're bringing now out, with the help of a number of wonderful partners, a revision of that will change the title in an important way. We're going to be calling it Guardian of Democracy, Civic Mission of the Nation. And one of the things it will do is recognize all of the important work that is already being done and in such innovative and significant fashion inside the business community. As part of what we're trying to say to all of the partners in the Civic Renewal Network, and we have virtually everyone in the country who's produced state standard aligned nonpartisan material that's available at no cost to schools. That's from the Library of Congress, the federal courts, the Constitution Center, the American Bar Association, and our own Annenberg Classroom. All of those groups are standing by, waiting to try to determine what they can do to help partner with the business community and the military community and the community colleges and any other place in society that will take up the civic mission of the nation. Because we think it's time to make clear to everyone that civics is all of our responsibilities. It's not just something that happens in schools, as we try to increase the likelihood that what's happening in schools is even better than it's ever been before. And what I've loved about your conversation is that we've been worried for such a long time that there's been a focus on civic education but not civic engagement, and that we have found out how to communicate civic knowledge. We're actually pretty good at it. We, by the way, are the ones who every September, by Constitution Day, put out the survey that indicates how little the public actually knows about foundational knowledge about the Constitution. When you see that statistic that says most people can't name 3 branches, that's our survey. We've been at it for a long time. We've seen a little bit of an uptake in recent years, but if you don't understand we have 3 branches, it's going to be really difficult for you to figure out how to engage, including engaging at your local and your state level. So I love the idea that the focus here is on engagement, with the presupposition that there's an educational component in that process. Because knowledge matters. You can't engage without knowing how to engage, knowing where the levers of power are, knowing what your rights and responsibilities are. But also, it's incredibly important that we activate the civic disposition to engage. And the conversations focus on the ways in which the business community is finding ways to increase constructive conversation, constructive forms of engagement, suggest that you're actually at the forefront of doing something that we should learn more about as we put together Guardian of Democracy, Civic Mission of the Nation for its next iteration, which should come out sometime mid-next year. So my first point is to say engagement with education is something that we share with you. And we have the Civic Renewal Partnership standing by waiting to hear how we can better take the materials that we've already got in place And I've asked Ellen Iwamoto, who coordinates this for me at the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania, to put a link up in the chat for you. So that we give you the opportunity, and we hope across all of the sectors, to take a look at what's already there from those people who've been in the trenches for the past 40 years, trying to create really good materials for schools as they ask, how can they best repurpose any of that or create additional new materials that would be of help? And we'd like to extend an invitation to say, as you found materials that work, please reach out to us so that we can feature them into the school community. We think this is all hands on deck, and the synergy is what's going to ultimately make this work. The other thing that I'd like to note is that your focus on civic skills is important for many reasons, but in particular, because when one gets into the work environment, one has different kinds of interactions with different people than we will ever assemble inside a school classroom. And I think we're going to be rebuilding the civic nature of this society from the bottom up. So I love the focus on community today. I think the ground up approach, business by business, community by community, with people we work with in communities in which we live, is the way in which we're going to ultimately restore our respect for each other, constructive engagement, and an understanding of how working together we can identify problems that we all agree are there, and debate and discuss the alternative solutions and find ways as a result to engage in forms of civic action that improve our communities and our states and our nation. So from the Civic Renewal Network, all of the partners standing by, waiting to work with you in any way that we can, and from the academic community that studies how we can increase the likelihood that knowledge, education, and engagement ultimately would translate into constructive action. We've got a bunch of people standing by to say thank you for all that you've done. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. And if you have any questions about any of the work that we've done, either with Civics Renewal Network, and there is a web page that's really deep with all of those materials, we'd invite you to take a look at it. I want to say in closing that the Civics Renewal Network model was built on a democratic model of engagement. We started the Civics Renewal Network because we realized that there were folks all over the country who are producing very high quality work, and others were duplicating the work, not even knowing it was there. And as a result, some money was being wasted. So we weren't effectively using the available resources that were there for the civics community, but also that there were synergies that weren't occurring because people just weren't sitting down and talking to each other. The Civics Renewal Network brings together all of these partners who continue to do their good work while collaborating with everyone else in order to increase the likelihood that we don't duplicate, we synergize, and in the process, we serve the needs of the nation better. And so what you'll find in the Civic Renewal Network is a whole menu of options. It's kind of like a smorgasbord. I grew up in Minnesota, so smorgasbords are real to me, in which we invite teachers to say, create your own curriculum out of what we already have. Don't necessarily assume everything you'd like is on, for example, the Annenberg Classroom site, which is known for its documentaries about key constitutional concepts and cases. Don't assume that everything that you need is there from the Library of Congress, which has wonderful historical timelines. Don't assume that it's all there from the Constitution Center, which has some superb materials on teaching the Constitution, particularly to young children. But assume that you can pick and choose and you can create a menu of options. We invite the business community to take a look at that menu to figure out how it can figure any parts of it that will be helpful and to identify those areas in which we could do better, we could do more, we could collaborate with you in ways that would create materials that would serve your needs and the needs of the nation even better than they already do. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity to hear this wonderful conversation. And Suzanne, it's just a delight to be able to work with you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. We're just thrilled to be partnering with you and so grateful for your strong support and for what you have been doing, as I say, for such a long time and continue to do each and every day. I know this is a real passion for you and we're very grateful. And I want to thank our wonderful panel. All three of you, such strong supporters of this, and again, folks who were doing this long before we came to you with this initiative on civics at work, but we're thrilled to have your support and your partnership. We are looking forward to working with you, and as Kathleen says, learning from you, and even as we try to provide support. And I just also want to thank Kathleen's colleague, my dear friend Ted McConnell, who talks to me about not just civic skills, but civic virtues, which I think is such a great way to articulate it. So thank you for all of our partners and for this very rich conversation today. Really grateful that you made the time to be here. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us.